Hey, everybody. Here I have the fabulous Kay Stonham. Very excited to get to speak to Kay. Kay is a comedy writer performer whose experience spans film and TV and theatre and radio. She has a really extensive list of writing credits. And she's also the co-founder of the fabulous Female Pilot Club. We first heard about Female Pilot Club back in episode 37 from the delightful Chelsea and Emily. So lovely to be able to ask Kay more today. Really excited to be able to ask about building a creative career as a comedy writer, ways to sustain that, all the things. Kay's brilliant on both the practical and industry front. So excited to speak to you, Kay. But anything before we dive in that people should know about you and your connections to comedy?
My connections to comedy. Well, as you said, I've been a radio TV writer for 30 years plus now.
Mm.
If you want to hear some of my work, you can
Yes,
find two series of mine on Audible. The first is called Robin and Wendy's Wet Weekends, which is about a couple who have a model village in their garage and they play out their marital strife in this model village, which is quite fun. That was
I love it.
Radio 4 production, but it's now on Audible. And also my series Bad Salsa, which is about three women who, having got the all clear from cancer, then go on to stick two stilettos up at the
Mm.
sea by deciding that they're going to live life to the absolute max. And they do. They join a salsa club and they proceed to behave badly. It's very good fun.
Oh my goodness, those are such brilliant concepts. And I remember Chelsea and Emily had this great advice when they came on the show before the script call. And they'd also been listening to loads and loads of pitches at live events. And when they were talking about pitching, they were talking about like actually being able to get the humor into how you describe the project. And you just did it brilliantly there. Both of those, I can see just all the potential of humor. They're so fun. So you're a living, breathing example of what is good to do. I love it. And when we did speak to Chelsea and Emily, as it was just before the deadline for Female Pilot Club script call. And since then, a lot has happened. You've been all the way through the process. You've had your fabulous live showcase. And actually, one of the guests from this series went to it and she said it was just so fun. She just loved it. So I want to ask about it. And I want to ask about it from the perspective of comedy writers. When you think like through that process and from the things that you saw, the team saw, the judges saw, what were some of the things that the writers did well who managed to get all the way through that process through to getting their work produced live?
Well, it sounds really simple, but the two writers who were in the end chosen for the live performances basically put in a lot of jokes.
Yeah.
And it sounds really obvious, but you would be surprised how many scripts we get, which people tell us are comedies.
Mm,
And they might, they're not heavy drama for sure. They might have quite a light, humorous sort of tone to the story, but they don't have any jokes.
mm,
And I would say if you are thinking of writing a sitcom, then you have just got to get yourself into the frame of mind that you do need to think about where is my humor coming from and how can I get the maximum opportunities to make people laugh. Because in Female Pilot Club, we put things on the stage in front of a live audience. Okay. So you have to make them laugh in the room and you've got to make them laugh, once every few minutes. So that's like two or three times a page. So you've got to be really, really disciplined with yourself and look at your work and say, have I got actual jokes? And you might not have that the first draft or even the second draft. You might be really concentrating on getting a great story, getting some good characters, which a lot of the scripts have done. We think, wow, that's good writing, good stories, lovely characters, interesting
mm,
situations, perhaps that we haven't seen before, which all makes them really, really interesting projects and possible candidates for a live reading. But if they haven't got those really good jokes, then we can't choose them because it doesn't do them any good service because then
mm.
we'll put their script on stage and people won't laugh. So that would be my big top takeaway. Make sure you add laughs if you're going to
Mm.
submit a comedy script.
Yeah, really good advice. And did much change between selecting the ones to go through to the showcase and then actually like seeing them stood up? So I don't know how much time you had, like, and then working with the performers. Did you see those scripts change much? How much time was there for input?
Um, There were a few changes. I mean, one script had been worked on, quite extensively by the writer, and she was a very experienced writer. So
Mm.
that script did not need, well, I would say almost any changes to the script itself. Um, but we did have a lot to work to do on that script because it was a radio script, and really
Oh,
we usually do television scripts, and what we do is we read out the scene action, which are like stage directions if people don't know what that is,
yeah.
which tells us what we would be seeing, on TV. But in a radio script, of course, you don't have that. But what you do have is sound effects. But it's not quite so much fun to hear the sound effects read out
Mm.
as it is to hear stage directions or scene action read out. So we got a live, what they call a Foley artist, who does live sound effects on stage with us. And she stood there, doing all the sound effects. She had the little door, which she did the opening and the closing of the door, and the ringing of the bell, and the knocking on the door. So that had to be really carefully thought through about which sound effects could we actually achieve on stage, and some of the sound effects which we couldn't really achieve, we had to cut. So there were changes which were around staging that particular script. And then the second script, we did make a few changes because the writer, and this was a very new writer, so we had, a contrasting pair of writers there, one very experienced and one very new. And her script had lots and lots and lots of characters in.
Mm.
And obviously, when you're putting it on stage, there's a limit to how many actors you can use. Really, you can't ask actors to come along and do two lines. There's got to be a kind of a part which feels like worth it for them to come and read. So we did quite a lot of work around amalgamating characters or cutting out characters who really, the story could do without. So that was the work we did on those two scripts. Not a huge amount, but enough to just really polish them and get them ready to give a really good account of themselves on stage in front of a live audience.
Mm. And that's super interesting. And last question about the showcase, but when you think through all those scripts as well and the conversations that were had with the judges, were there any other pitfalls that you noticed apart from just not enough joke density, not enough laugh out loud moments? Were there any other things that you thought, oh, I'm seeing this pattern crop up? And if not, no problem.
Yeah, no, there were a few things. I mean, first of all, I'd say make sure that your premise is interesting, um, rather than just something which you think is sort of amusing in your everyday life.
Mm.
Something which is amusing in your everyday life, yeah, it's amusing when you tell your friends, but again, when you think about the sort of shows that we watch on TV and the sort of shows that we enjoy, usually there's something really really unique about each show's premise, isn't there? So a definite USP to the series. So if you want your series to be, about contemporary life, that's fine, but make sure you've got a twist, a USP that can make your show stand out so that we can say, oh, it's about this. For instance, as I mentioned with Robin and Wendy,
Mm.
basically about suburban couples living next to each other, and it was kind of like contrasting characters and poor marriages. Robin and Wendy had a very bad marriage, so it was about a very familiar territory, but we gave it the twist of they have this model village, and a lot of their conflicts are played out
Mm.
through the ideas about this model village. So that gave it a twist. When you go to a commissioner, you can say it's about a couple who've got a model village, and
Yeah.
straight away, as you said, you can see the humorous possibilities there. And I think again, a lot of the scripts, they didn't have anything particularly stand out about them. So make sure your concept has got something which is stand out that you can explain to people in one or two sentences. It's about this.
Mm.
If you can't, then it could well be a little bit too general to really make it stand out, in a crowd of scripts. And just make sure that it's not something you've seen before. Again, some of the premises we thought, well, we've just had a series similar on a similar theme on
Mm.
TV. And if you don't know that, then maybe you're not watching enough TV. If you want to write TV, you've got to watch TV. So make sure that the premise that you have isn't something which has just been done or has been done a couple of years ago. Check
Mm.
out your premise. So
Yeah.
those are my things to really, really think about when you're submitting scripts.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And people who are listening, I mean, that's just great advice in general. And even if you you're listening now and the showcase has ended, Kay still works with writers in lots of different ways as a professional. And one of those is the script consultancy. And I wanted to ask you about that because there are different people who offer script consultancies. And we touched on this with Chelsea and Emily, and you're such a good person to ask because you have such a long track record of supporting writers. You have your own industry experience and you're such an ethical, supportive person. So we can kind of trust what you say. So when writers are thinking about getting professional input and potentially even paying for that, going to script consultancy, what do you think are some things that's good for them to consider so that they, for example, are getting it at a point that it's useful or finding the right kind of person for them?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, I mean, what the first thing to think about is, what do you want out of that script consultancy? Are you looking to polish a script that you've already taken through a number of drafts and you just want to get it, get it at its absolute best before you submit it to producers, or you submit it maybe to competitions? In which case you're looking for somebody with a very good track record in the industry, maybe somebody who's done polishing work on professional scripts, punch up work if it's a comedy, on comedies, to just look at your script and give you those last few pointers about how you can make it really, really special and really, really stand out. So that's one kind. And if you're doing that, then you probably want 1 or 2 sessions, probably maximum 3 sessions, I'd say, just to get your script up to its absolute best. Or if you're looking to get some more development work on a script that maybe you're only just beginning to think about, maybe you've done one draft of it, you're not sure which direction to take it, then you want somebody who's going to work with you over a number of sessions, and who maybe is going to be somebody who's going to have quite a lot of creative ideas and doesn't mind giving those to you to help you bounce ideas between the two of you, to help that script develop in ways which perhaps you hadn't thought of. You're getting an extra bit of sort of creative input there, aren't you? Or if you're a very new writer, you might somebody who really is going to help you become a better writer. So you might want somebody who can say to you, okay, well, I've seen what you've written. It might be a script, it might be an outline, it could be a treatment. And what are you really trying to say with the script? What are you really trying to get out of this story? And really maybe even take you back a couple of stages to rewriting an outline, and then maybe doing a treatment or a beat sheet and scene by scene breakdown, depending on what kind of script you're doing, so that you're going back and helping them through a development process which perhaps they haven't done before. Some of the people who we have in the script consultancy, they've literally just opened Final Draft or another software package, and just started, scene one, and started to write their script, which that can be great, it can work well for you, but it's not really how scripts are normally developed. Normally you would take it through a development process of starting off with perhaps a one page or even a paragraph of your idea, and then building it to a one page, and then taking it into a fuller treatment or a fuller outline, and then doing a beat sheet or a scene by scene, so that you've really got your plot nailed down. You know who your characters are, you know what they're going to be doing at any point in the story, and then you can just write the script much more easily without going adrift, taking wrong turns. If you just start writing a script, you can be seduced by a lovely scene you've written and take you off in a completely different direction and end up goodness knows where. And sometimes that might be fantastic, right? I'm not writers who write like that, look, and if it works for you, that's fantastic. But particularly if you're doing television, then you need to follow a more formal development process, and you might not have had experience of that. So again, with our script consultancy, we can give people experience of that, which is taking them really on a learning journey as a writer, so that they learn how to develop a script in a more sort of professional way. So it really depends what you're after, I think, who you might go with, and also who you trust. Sorry, excuse me.
No
Who you
problem.
trust. I mean, I would always say, if you possibly can, try and get one session with someone
Mm.
before you commit to paying for a lot of sessions, because it could be that, you know, that person's not on your wavelength, or you don't like the sort of notes they're going to give you, or it's not quite what you had in mind. So I know a lot of the script consultancy services, which are excellent, by the way, some of them are
Mm.
excellent, but most often you have to buy a package.
Mm.
And I think, particularly if you're new to script consultancy, and particularly if you haven't got a lot of money, which, let's face it, you know, most writers haven't, I would say try and get somebody who will give you one session first to see how you get on. And then if you need more sessions, then you can buy them after that, if that person is giving you what you need and it's a good match.
That's brilliant. Such helpful advice and so much great vocabulary in there to kind of inform people kind of thinking where they are in that stage and what kind of gaps they may have or what they might need to know, which is brilliant. And because you, again, you have so much experience of taking projects through from idea right the way through to production, which can be quite an extensive arc. Are there any other misconceptions that you see lots of writers have when they come to you, with regards to what that process might actually be like, getting it all the way through to production?
Um, I mean, I think if you're working actually on a TV production, then probably what writers who haven't done that before don't know is that it's quite a, how can I put it? Um, it's very intensive, and you're going to be given lots and lots of notes, and not just by one person. The notes will come from multiple sources. You know, you might get notes from your script editor, your producer, your executive producer, might even go up to channel controller, or head of genre, or, you know, somebody in that commissioning team. So you're going to be getting a lot of voices having input into your script. And that, if you haven't encountered that before, that can be really quite disconcerting, and newer writers can lose confidence, I think, in what they've written. And
Mm.
really it's to develop an understanding that that just is the process, and that doesn't mean you haven't written a good script, that doesn't mean you're not a good writer, that's just what the process is. And also that the notes are not optional in TV. Okay,
Right.
so that, you know, they're not like what I mean, they might be presented as optional, if you see what I
Mm.
mean, but
Yeah.
in actual fact they're not really optional. I mean, what is optional about them, I suppose, is that normally if you're given a note, it will be something that's not quite working in your script, and the producer or the script editor, or whoever's coordinating the notes and giving them to the writer, will probably make a suggestion as to how you can fix that problem in the script. And it's not kind of compulsory that you take that person's suggestion, but what it means is you've got to find some kind of answer to that problem in the script. So it's not sort of acceptable to just go, well, I didn't do any of the notes, here's the second draft, and it's pretty much like the first draft. You know, you are expected to take all this stuff on board, because you're in an industrial process. You know,
Mm.
it's a big production, there'll be a massive budget, and you are expected to, you know, to play your part in the team. You're not really writing as an individual artist, as you might be, say, if you were a novelist, where everything that happens in the story and the characters and the development of it is down to your own creativity and your own taste and your own aesthetics. You know, you're working within a context where somebody else high above you in the team has an idea about how that story should be and how that project should be, and those ideas have to be taken into account in your writing. So perhaps I would say that that is something which perhaps people don't know, or aren't really aware of, before they've worked in a professional TV setting.
Yeah, that's great insider information. Thank you. And you mentioned that even with the showcase, you had one project that was initially conceived for radio and one that was for TV. And it's never easy when we're talking in generalities, but because you also have experience of both of those things, when you're thinking of concepts in your own work, are there particular kind of like things that really differentiate which form you sort of route different ideas to? Because I imagine lots of creative people have, lots of ideas and, notebooks full of ideas. And the ones that you've described, did you know, for example, that they were definitely going to be radio ideas? Or how does that kind of work in terms of matching it up?
Well, now this is interesting because I think you've got to be very pragmatic as a writer,
Mm,
and you've got to basically, it's really, really hard to get anything original commissioned. Okay.
yeah.
Really hard. And so you've got to be quite flexible about the way you think about your projects and where you're going to pitch them. It might be that you've got an idea which you think is very, very specifically radio and it couldn't work anywhere else. And while we're talking about radio, just one thing to mention is that
Mm,
my experience of radio as a writer is that you do have much, much more creative control than
mm,
you do in TV. My experience is that you work with a producer, perhaps a BBC Studios or with an independent production company, and once you've got your idea commissioned, you're left much more alone to develop the scripts with yourself and with the producer. There's not as much oversight as there would be from TV. So that is one reason to that people enjoy working in radio. Actually, in a way,
mm,
it's a little bit easier to be more of an individual creator in radio. But back to so that the reason I said that is that might be one reason why you think, well, like this is my baby, this is my idea. I really want it to be exactly as I want it to be. Radio's a good choice for that because you're more likely to get exactly your own vision on radio than you are on TV. With TV, I'd say that um, really it depends on the budget, that you're looking. Are you looking for something which
mm,
is going to be really, really high budget? You're unlikely to get that away as a new writer. Um, so if you've got something which again might take place in lots of different locations, maybe as a new writer you might think, well, again, that might be better on radio because we won't actually have to go to the West Indies or whatever. We can
mm,
just have it. We can imagine it. Um, but my own projects, interestingly, Robin and Wendy's Weekends, which I wrote with a partner, Simon Greenall, that was something which we developed as sketches. We developed sketches on a TV show.
mm,
So we developed these characters on the TV show. They were very popular. People liked them, and a production company asked us if we'd like to develop a TV show based on those characters, which we did. We wrote. We had 2 script commissions, so we were very close to getting a series commissioned. And then, as often happens, it didn't get greenlit. We didn't get it commissioned on TV, which was a real shame. We thought it would work very well, but this happens. There's so many projects get pitched. Obviously, not everything can get pitched. So we didn't get it away on TV. And so I then decided to repackage it as a radio series. So I reworked it, rethought it, and I pitched it to Radio 4, with whom I already had a good relationship because I'd already had a series on Radio 4 called Audio Diaries. And they loved it, and we got it commissioned that way. So the reason I sort of told that story is it shows how you have to be a bit pragmatic.
mm,
You might want your show to be on TV, and let's face it, TV is much better paid than radio on a practical level. You're going to get more money if you sell your show to TV than if you sell it to radio. But if you can't get it made on TV, then it's worth thinking about radio. And obviously, radio commissioners and producers hate this because they want everything to be conceived originally for radio. But in actual fact, with comedy, I think most projects can work equally well. There are some things which are just way better on radio, but a lot of projects that you've thought of for TV can work equally well on radio, I think. So it's worth bearing in mind, you know, if you can't get it commissioned on radio, try TV. If you can't get it
mm.
commissioned on TV, try radio. That would be my tip. Be pragmatic.
I love that. And two particular things I want to ask you as follow-on questions from that. One is, so you've mentioned pragmatic, and obviously like a great example there of being willing to, deal with it not being greenlit, repackage it, move forward. from that, you can see you already had those relationships with Radio 4, so building relationships. Are there any other things that you think have been really key to your success in terms of being able to sustain a creative career? Because that may be something that people really aspire to and isn't easy to do. And I assume you've seen lots of people who are around at different stages who have chosen not to continue with that. So what's been the key to the success of being able to sustain a comedy writing career?
Well, I would say you've got to be willing to be flexible. You've got to be willing to do a lot of things. I think, as you know, I started off as a performer.
Yeah.
So I was in a lot of sketch shows myself as a sketch performer. And I really only began writing when I had my children. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not able to do the same kind of work that I could before I had children. It just wasn't really possible. And I thought, well, maybe I can start writing at home. And then I started writing sketches and I started writing gags, particularly on sketch shows like Weekending, which was a very famous topical show of the time. Um, and then I progressed on to writing longer narrative pieces. And then as soon as I had that experience under my belt, then I started to try and write for other mediums. I wrote for kids shows. Um, we did all kinds of links on entertainment shows, uh, lots and lots of different kinds of writing that took the comic genre. So it's very important not to be too, oh, I don't want to say snobby, and I don't want to, what word do
Mm.
I want to use? I don't know, picky. I'm going to say picky.
Yeah.
Not to be too picky and sort of think, well, I'm only going to write my own sitcoms. I'm only going to write my own. If you're a drama writer, I'm only going to write my own dramas. Most writers work on other people's shows, and you're lucky if you're a comedy writer because there are lots of other forms of writing you can do. Like I said, you can write sketches, you can write gags on shows, you can write links on entertainment shows, voiceovers on reality TV. There's all kinds of other kinds of work that you could do. So I would say really be proactive about finding that work, which will keep you going financially. I also developed another string to my bow, and my children were older, and I frankly didn't want to be sitting on my own at home just writing at my laptop forever, which is a bit lonely, let's
Yeah.
face it. I wanted to do something which involved working with other people as well. So I started teaching writing, which I really enjoy. I really enjoy working with other writers or with students. And so I began teaching, first of all, creative writing and then screenwriting and script writing. I did an MA in screenwriting, and now I've just finished a PhD as it happens. So I've got this whole other string to my bow, which is a kind of um, an academic life. And so I would say, unless you're really, really non-stop successful as a writer, it's really hard to sustain yourself only on your writing. Many, many, many TV writers, radio writers have other strings to their bow. And often it's to do with teaching or consulting or, like I said, being an academic. But people do other things, they make jams and preserves. They do, they do part-time aromatherapy or all kinds of things. So I think be prepared to have a day job that you can fill in if you're not getting a commission, because otherwise, if everything is dependent on your writing, I think it can, in a way, it can hamper your creativity. You get turned down, if you get a rejection, it's disappointing, but also it's such a blow to your ability, to pay the rent or to put the food on the table. So I'd say always have something else if you can, that is going to just help you keep that money coming in when things get a bit lean on the writing front.
Think that's very sage advice. And I do want to ask about the PhD because actually, in a previous conversation with you, you just completed your PhD and you told me what the subject was. And I'd love it. I know you can't condense a PhD into do it justice in just a few sentences, but any kind of insights into what that area is, because it warms my heart that people like you are willing to be doing this work. So, what was the sort of focus of your PhD?
So the focus of my PhD really was to think about who gets to tell their stories in comedy, who gets to have those jobs, to get those commissions, who gets to pursue a life as a comedy writer. I've been working, as I said, for 30 years plus now in the industry. And what felt that I was experiencing was that although I did quite well, I did, I had good jobs, I had good commissions, I felt like maybe some of the options which were open to other of my peers who were male or who were more middle class. Maybe they'd been to Oxford or Cambridge or
Mm,
one of the kind of red brick universities, which I hadn't. I felt that there were more opportunities that came their way, and I felt that there were some circles which maybe it wasn't as easy for me to access. My background is working class. I didn't go to university. I went to drama school, as I said, much later on. Now I've done an MA and now a PhD, but I felt that I was in a different kind of circle from many of the people who I was coming up against as competition in the comedy writing world to get commissions and to get jobs. And I wanted to see whether that was an experience which other people had had. I wanted to see whether there was some kind of situation in the industry where some opportunities were more open to some people in some groups than others. So I interviewed 20 comedy writers and I interviewed 10 gatekeepers. They were producers or commissioners or channel heads or execs or people who had their own production companies. And I asked them about their entry into the industry, what had helped them get in and stay in, and also about the commissioning process. And for me, that was key.
mm,
How do things get commissioned? How do you get a chance to get your work commissioned and therefore your voice heard? And then I looked at people's experiences and whether people's identity, whether they were Black or Asian or other minority ethnic, whether they were women or men, or whether they were working class, middle class, or upper middle class, whether these things had affected their perceptions of the opportunities they'd had and how they'd fared in their careers. So it's really about, identity and how it affects opportunities within that tiny little world of comedy writing. But of course, it fits into a much larger discourse of diversity, equality, inclusion in the creative industries. And I think it's probably quite well known now that the creative industries are actually not as inclusive as perhaps we think
mm,
they are. We always think of them as very open, as very, you know, um, particularly in things like comedy. Surely, if you're funny, you're funny. You can make your way. But in actual fact, in the creative industries, the employment, for instance, of working class people, the levels of employment are lower in the creative industries than they are in any other sector. So the record is not good in the creative industry, and in film and television, it's not good at all. The Writers Guild did a wonderful piece of research that came out in 2018 on writers in all different genres. And in fact, the comedy genre came out the worst in
oh, did
TV.
it?
Absolutely, it was only 11% of sitcoms were written entirely by women. So it was really, really low, very, very low. And I think in film it was only 17% of women had written at least one film. So there were clear discrepancies, certainly in between men and women. And I wanted to look at social class
Mm,
and sort of broaden it out a little bit and say, well, how do the different identities fare when it comes to being commissioned? And so it's a qualitative study. So no statistics have come out of it, but a wealth of lived experience
mm,
and how it's been for them over, some of them 30, like me, 30 plus years in the industry. So it gives a great picture of what it's been like for women, for Black writers, for writers who are from different social and economic classes, and people who've been to university, not been to university, types of universities they've been to, of how it's been and how they feel it's affected their careers. So I think it's just it's a very useful, I hope it will be anyway, a very useful document that researchers will be able to look at now and in the future to kind of, think about what needs to be done in the industry to make it more inclusive and to give newer writers from all kinds of different groups more opportunities to get their voices heard than we've had over the last 30 years. Hopefully it's better already, hopefully. But anyway, that's what it's about. That was a very long answer. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, that was perfect.
It's a
And
very
thank you
long piece
so
of
much
work.
for sharing that with us. And it's so valuable. And it gives me such heart that there is research like that to point back to, when again there can be just the assumption, oh, if you're funny, or make it, when like you just know from looking around and listening and hearing behind the scenes that that's not the case. Or sometimes one creative project I was involved with, the way they were talking about it was the cream always rises to the top, and I was just thinking that's just not the case, like in terms of like how things are organized. But I don't have the research, so I
Well,
am,
it's often said that, isn't it? The cream
yeah,
is
I
not, but
just don't believe that.
what that really means is those who rise to the top are described as the cream.
Yeah, exactly that. Thank you. That's because at the time I was so frustrated and didn't have I couldn't quite, I just was sensed it was wrong, and you've just explained exactly why it's wrong. Thank you. I love that.
But
No,
also,
so when
it's incredibly subjective, isn't
it
it?
is, oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. There's so much that's
One
wrong with
person's
that.
definition of cream is completely different.
Exactly.
It, one thing about my research is that I also looked at like who was choosing.
Mm,
It's relevant who's choosing, isn't it? What happened for me with a lot of my career was projects that I had that would be pushed up the development chain largely by women producers or women
mm,
execs or whatever. They would and were considered very funny and very relevant and well written, etc. They'd get to a certain point in the chain of commissioning where they'd be read quite often by a very middle class man.
mm,
And there would be suddenly a very different reaction to the script. There would be, well, I don't get it. I don't, why is that funny? Or
mm-hmm.
often even, and this came out in the research, women don't act like that. Women aren't like that
Right.
from a man. And several women in the research um, reported having had that said to them as well, which it's not like you can say when you're a woman sitting there,
Mm,
a man says to you, I don't think women are like that. You go, well, okay. But so I think that has to be recognized, that who is choosing
mm,
is really, really important. It's really, really relevant. And yeah, we haven't got to the stage yet where, I mean, I think that is recognized um, more generally now, that commissioners themselves or producers or other forms of gatekeepers should be from a broader range of society than they have traditionally been. I think that's kind of recognized, but it's not necessarily always actually the case
mm,
throughout broadcasting, because these are very high level jobs. And the reality is that the higher up the chain that you go, the fewer women you find, the fewer Black and Asian or other minority ethnic people that you find, the fewer LGBTQ plus you find, the fewer working class people you find. So there is quantitative research out there that shows these things from all kinds of bodies. And so I think we know this stuff to be true. It's just how do we change it and how do we keep it changed?
mm,
Because sometimes there can be improvements, but then those gains can be lost again. I think Ofcom's last report showed that after the pandemic, it was women who suffered most in terms of that kind of weed out in the industry that there was. More women were lost to the system than men, for instance. So even gains that you get, you've got to hang on to, and that's not always the case.
mm.
Important
Yeah.
to keep the emphasis on thinking about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And last question. So many things I'd love to ask you, but last question, as we come towards wrapping up, is just from where you are now. So we're in May 2024. What are you excited to work on that's coming up for you this year, whether it's in individual projects or with Female Pilot Club or in things that you're supporting?
We've got so many things that we're
I
doing.
bet you do.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm doing an adaptation of a novel, which I'm really, really looking forward to,
Mm.
for a production company who's commissioned me to do this adaptation of this really fun novel set in Italy. So that's
Mm.
really exciting. And I'm just hoping I'm just going to get to go to Italy.
Yeah.
That's my main excitement. No, I think it's a really, really fun story with a great female character in the center of it.
Oh.
So I'm really looking forward to doing that myself. We've just managed to get, we're really excited to get a comedy grant from the BBC. So
Oh,
we're
how
really excited
fantastic.
about the Female Pilot Club, and that's going to fund us to do a mentorship scheme, which is hoping to find writers from, to give writers a chance to have the Female Pilot Club experience if they don't live in London. So we're going to be
Mm.
looking at writers from different parts of the country and trying to have an online read rather than a live read in London.
Amazing.
So we're going to be trying to broaden it out a little bit. And we've also got, we've got some projects ourselves in with Radio 4, so we might even get to produce a series of our own. Fingers
Mm.
crossed.
Oh,
So lots of
fingers crossed. So
fun.
fun. Oh my goodness. I love it. I love how much you manage to do and produce and create at the same time as being such a fabulously supportive person in the space of comedy, and also for female writers within the space too, or people who are, like you say, LGBTQIA plus. So thank you, Kay. I'll put the full list of links in the show notes, but is there anywhere that you'd like to point people to as a primary place to find out more about you and your work?
Okay, so I've got my website.
Yeah.
There's lots on there. You can go to my agent, MMB Creative. You find my
Yeah.
CV on there. As I said, there's Audible, and then Female Pilot Club. We've got our website, and of course our podcast. Do listen to the
Yes.
Female Pilot Club podcast, which has got lots of great tips for writers, especially writers new to the industry. Actually, I would definitely
Yes.
recommend, because you're hearing lots of different writers talk about their craft
Mm.
and about what excites them about comedy. So it's a really fun listen, I think.
It is, and such brilliant guests. It's absolutely fabulous. So definitely check that out too. And we'll put all those links in the show notes. And thank you so much, Kay. I would learn so much, and I'm sure listeners will too.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed
Okay.
talking to you.